think it is very much an illusion that by modernizing your data systems, by modernizing tools, platforms, you actually get a modernized data decision capability. And you don't, right? So you implement data governance by implementing a certain framework, by implementing certain structures, by implementing an operating model. But we don't think about what is it actually we do and why are we doing it? Why can't we get something like that for data, right? For data governance. These are our data governance rules.
Welcome everyone to Data Reality Check, where data meets the real world. I'm your host, Amy Raygada, and this is the podcast where we talk about data management as it really is, not as it looks in strategy decks or maturity models. Today's episode is about illusions, specifically the illusion that better tools, modern architectures, or new labels like data product automatically fix long-standing data management problems. Because what I see again and again is this. Organizations believe they modernize data management, but the fundamentals haven't actually changed. So today's core question is, what do organizations consistently get wrong about data products and governance, even when they think they're doing everything well? And today I am joined by Winfried Adalbert. Thank you so much for accepting my invitation. He has extensive experience in data management and governance, part of DAMA Norway, working with organizations that operate at scale across domains under real regulatory, financial, operational constraints, and so on. And what I value about Winfried's perspective is that he does treat governance not as a theoretical construct. He looks at ownership, accountability, incentives, and decision rights. And of course, he asks whether they actually work in practice. Winfried, welcome to Data Reality Check. Thank you again for being here.
Well, thank you, Amy, and thank you for the invitation. Fantastic to be here.
Thank you. I want to start with a pattern that we see everywhere. Organizations, they invest in modern platforms, introduce new terminology. Maybe they even declare a move to data products or data mesh. We're going to do data governance in the right way. But underneath, many of the same data management problems remain. And from your experience, what are the most common signs that an organization believes it has mature data management, but it actually doesn't?
That's a very good starting question. And I think it's about, called it an illusion, and I think it is very much an illusion that by modernizing your data systems, by modernizing tools, platforms, you actually get a modernized data decision capability. And you don't, right? Because there's so much more to it. And yes, we talk a lot about data governance is not a technical issue, it's a human system. And it's true, but what are we actually doing about it, right? And one thing, and I'm writing about this in my book as well, is, and I call it the build mentality that we have in many organizations, right? Where it's so easy to build new solutions, new possibilities, new platforms, introducing new technologies, new tools, but we don't change the fundamental composition of how we do governance, how we do decisions. And you mentioned some of these constraints in your introduction, right? We have business constraints, we have regulatory constraints, we have technology constraints, we have a market to operate within, right? It provides a certain constraints depending on our industry. These are the things that we need to look at. These are the things that we need to understand, and these are the things we need to negotiate between and balance. And then tooling comes in, right?
Yeah, that's one of the problems that I see the most. And I also mentioned, in my book, The Ferrari Nobody Drives. Let's have the best platform, especially now on LinkedIn or everywhere you see, okay, this new company with this new shiny platform, this new shiny tool, and head of data, for some reason, they think, okay, let's buy, let's construct something nice, and then no one use it. And then there are like problems, even in the AI world now, like the EU AI Act and the fines, if you're taking into consideration these or not. Where do you think the teams confuse technical modernization with the management maturity? Why this gets so confusing? Because one thing is socio-technical and the other thing is just technicalities or tooling, as you mentioned.
Yeah, I think we need to dive deeper into the socio-technical part as well. Maybe we do that a bit later. But I think we talk a lot about governance from a structural perspective or procedural perspective, right? So you implement data governance by implementing a certain framework, by implementing certain structures, by implementing an operating model. But we don't think about what is it actually we do and why are we doing it. So I'm trying to take a step back, think of why are we doing governance in the first place, and what are these enduring responsibilities we need to have in the organization to actually enable governance and enable then also the value creation that we are doing. And I came to the conclusion that there are, in fact, three of those. And I gave them role names because it's easier to remember, right? A data negotiator, right? We talked about all these constraints, someone to negotiate these constraints and translate that to our data reality. Data director, this is about strategy, this is about understanding where are we actually going with the work we are doing in data, but also how does it connect to our organization when we talk about culture, right? And I've never seen a culture change due to someone at the leadership level say, oh, we now are a data-driven organization. Um, culture changes because you are connecting to the core of what the organization is about, what the organization's vision is about. Sounds fluffy. I give you an example. Right, in every oil and gas company I worked for, and I worked for a couple throughout my career, there is in every meeting room a sign back on the wall that says something like, we are safety, and these are our safety values for the organization, right? And there's a reason for that, because safety has been very important to ensure that there are no incidents, that there are no issues for health, for sustainability, right? Oil spills are a good example. And we had these examples throughout the years. And that's why health and safety has become very important. And there is a sign in every meeting room. And there are consistent measurements that organizations do to ensure that we uphold our safety commitments. Why can't we get something like that for data, right? For data governance. These are our data governance rules. This is what we commit to, and this is what we are also consistently tracking over the years. And I think there we are in one of these very practical issues that we are, in fact, not tracking things consistently over the years. The last one, I said there were three roles. The third one is the data auditor. Right, someone to ensure that we can be held accountable for our actions. It's the part that no one wants to talk about, but that is very much an important core function of governance. Right, and we have that compliance part in governance as one of these very core functions. So auditing, accountability, creating assurance loops are very important, and I think that's something that we need to emphasize.
I completely agree with you. And that's why I wonder myself sometimes when I go to a new organization, and they ask me, hey, I would like to do data governance. I would like to have a deck. I'm like, data governance is not a deck, right? It's the whole, as you said, organizational change. But then because a lot of companies, like also with the strategy that I see very often, they have us on a strategy that someone wrote and it has some references to Gartner and maybe to some books here and there. And then they think this strategy, it doesn't evolve, right? They just have there like a beautiful PPT. No one is doing that. And then they come, but out, we are a data-driven organization. I would like to ask you why it's so easy for leadership to believe that this is progress, right? That they have a great operating reality, a great operating model, but it didn't really change. The organization on the inside is still not working as intended in terms of governance, instead of taking ownership in terms even of data quality, because you still see a lot of problems in there and the business complaining about these topics.
I think there are several issues here. I think, first of all, some of that senior management sits way too far away from the actual problems, and very much don't see them. And you know that if you worked in a hierarchical organization, that with every layer of management, you also bring in a layer of blur, basically. So the message that the C-level gets is not the message that is actually happening on the sharp end. That's an issue, and that's also an issue for C-level being able to take any accountability for what's happening in the organization. So that's one thing. Another thing that I've been seeing a lot is that there's a strategy execution gap. Right? We build a strategy, we have good thoughts, and then we just publish it, and then we're done. That's the strategy is out. Yeah. But actually, the real work starts once the strategy is published, because then you have to implement it. And if you don't involve your organization at large early in the development of the strategy, that gap becomes larger and larger, right? Because it's really hard, and you have to do the entire explanation of the strategy continuously to each stakeholder, and they think, well, we were not involved in creating it. We have no ownership to this strategy. How should we implement it? So yes, involving people very early in the strategy development is key.
Yeah, I believe that, and also in the part of, especially in governance, right? Because I'm a fan of governance that enables, not that constrains. And a way to do it is that we are not the data police, because you know how it is. Usually, data governance people, the data police, these people is annoying, blah, 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 blah. But if you involve the right people at the beginning and you automate a lot of these, let's say, governance parts as much as you can, once you have talked to people, because some people thinks like they are going to automate already since the very beginning, but no one talked to the people that is around working with the data or consuming the data,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, no worries. I've been talking a lot about federated data governance throughout the years, and I think that's the only real model that can help you to ensure that this problem is covered. Because things break down at the distributed end. They don't break down centrally. But then you create a certain distance between that, right? And you can't manage that centrally, and you can't manage it decentralized either, because then you can't connect it across. Just think about master data, for example, and the issues we have there. So the only really viable option is to create something federated, where you have local responsibility to be able to solve your problems where they occur, but also feed them back to a centralized, if I want to call it a hub, we can call it a hub, but a centralized hub that helps you to propagate whatever happened to the other spokes and the other parts of the distributed organization.
Yeah. But actually, this topic links a lot with the data product side of things, right? With ownership and so on. So I would like to talk about data products, but very explicitly from a governance perspective. Because, you know, a lot of organizations talk about data products, but in practice, they are still managing the data the same way as before. Like the other time, I was with a client that I might meet soon. And he told me, we have 650 data products. And I was skeptical already, because in my career so far, I haven't heard that a company has that many well done, right, data products. Then I got some insights from someone in the company, and they told me, no, basically there are 650 tables renamed as data products, right? It's just a facade, like just to show off, like you have done something modern, or you are in data mesh or something like that. So, from your point of view, what fundamentally changes in governance when the data is treated as a product? What do you see the advantages if you really have a proper data product, not these kind of fakey table ones?
Yeah, and I had a discussion just the other week with someone who asked the question, have we overdone data products? have we over-communicated data products for data people, but not for anyone else that are our consumers? So do people really understand what we mean by data products? And it kind of triggered some thought. And you said it, yeah, are we just renaming data sets and calling them data products, or are we actually changing something about it? And from a governance perspective, we definitely should be able to change something about it, right? We should create a lifecycle responsibility for our data products. We should create certain clear, mandated, and budgeted ownership for data products. And we can actually govern products from the time they are created, rather than build and then govern, right? So there are a lot of good options from a governance perspective on products, but what about the demand side, right? Does a data scientist really want a curated data product, or do you rather want to connect to the raw data? And I feel like when I look at the reality of data products, a lot of teams are bypassing the data product. Maybe seems to be too bureaucratic. So have we really communicated the value of data products clearly enough?
I think that is one of the biggest problems, and that's why I address in my book as well, right? Because okay, just renaming a table or putting there, I don't know, a dashboard, that's not a data product, as you said. Like maybe the machine learning engineers, the data scientists, they just want raw data, but we also have to make sure that that raw data has enough quality, right? Because I was also in another engagement not long ago, and that they have a data scientist team that they call themselves just researchers, not implementers.
Hmm.
And basically they do experimentation only, and the data that they get is provided by the data platform, but the data platform is still very raw. So in the sense of they need to do a lot of work to make it reliable. And I'm like, how do you feel of using this kind of data that has a lot of data quality problems, because at the end this is going to affect the result of your experiment as well? No, we just change a few numbers here and there to make it kind of work, and then we know it's going to work when we implement this
Hmm.
into production. And I'm like, oh, I don't think it really
Hmm.
works like that, because if you're an experimenter, you don't really understand what is the production deployment when it's in real life, when you anyway you need to consume that data in real life to present it to clients or to your customers. And I see here a lot of this connection, right, between the reality of having maybe some space to experiment, that maybe you don't need a data product at that specific time, and then you need a real data product that is curated and is ready to use when you're going to deploy to production. I see it some way somehow that there should be a space for experimentation, but then you have to follow the rules to make sure it's good. What do you think
Yeah,
about that?
yeah, definitely. And I think one of these issues that I've seen is semantic bound product definitions, and are very much focused on the domain that has created the product, and can't be really reused by any other domain because they don't understand what things mean. And I've been thinking about it from various perspectives. One, obviously, AI. Can we define AI readiness by defining the same criteria as for data product? I think we are very close. um, and secondly, I'm thinking of it like a food label, right? If you buy a product, you have a label on there. It has some nutrition facts. You know what the product is. You know what you can use the product for. You know if that product fits your diet or not. And I think that's what a data product wrapper has to be, right? Something that gives you the indicators on what you can use it for, and in what context you can use it, and for what purpose. But that should be it, right? It shouldn't be aligned just with the one use case that you have in your creating domain.
Yeah, the end data products, they are supposed to be reusable, right? And they need to evolve
Right.
over time. So we need the feedback loops. And then maybe there you have another consumer. And instead of creating the same product again with maybe one more column, you reuse this one, and then you add this column, and you explain the users how now this product evolved because there are more users, and now it includes one or two more columns. You can keep using what you need, but this is also going to serve other department. And you evolve it to version 2, right? And then maybe version 3, and maybe you need to drop something that is not used anymore. But this is about the ownership, the accountability, and everybody agrees on the ownership and accountability at the beginning, but in practice, these fade away, right? From your experience and from data management and governance perspective, what does real ownership of these data products or whatever you're working on actually mean? Because I feel like the stewards, we have a lot of fancy words in DAMA, right? But let's put it in simple words for the audience that might not be very, related to that topic, but just plain data business owners and so on.
Yeah, I deliberately gone away from the term ownership, and there's one real reason for it, and I see that at the end of the day, there is something called legal ownership, and there's something called process ownership, and there's something called definition ownership. So you are basically fragmenting ownership in your organization on the get-go. So you could say all data produced, captured, and validated in your organization is owned by the organization. It's the legal ownership, right? And then you have a process ownership of how do I treat the data, what changes can be made to the data, which is the process ownership, and then definition ownership, which I think closely aligns with what a data owner does in a classical sense. And that fragmentation there is quite present in most organizations I've been in. And then you get these questions on what am I actually responsible for? What can I do? What can't I do? And you have to be very clear in your definition of that ownership. But when you are very clear in the definition of the ownership, you can again create certain gaps between them because things are moving, things are evolving, right? So I'm tending to talk about accountability much more. Ever since we talked about cloud accountability in the early 2010s, and I think it's the same for data, right? And accountability in organizations for data is often again placed a bit too high in the hierarchy, too far away from the actual problems that occur. I think accountability should be accountable for the downstream impact of your decisions as well. And then, we've been talking a lot about, we have been talking a lot about AI, but the industry is talking a lot about AI and a lot about context lately. And I think context is very important. But even if you create the perfect context and follow that, you can still create gaps of intent or meaning or purpose. It doesn't mean that if the context is right, the data is right. And I think that's something that we have that's very important to understand. So accountability is also accountability for understanding meaning and intent.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Of course, now with the buzzwords of context graph, that it's been out there the last weeks, they bring it to something that is already been there for years. They just put a new word before or after, and it's a complete new, definition of something else, right? But it's basically what we have been doing for a time, and I completely agree with that. By the way, going back to the example that you did about legal ownership, I really like that you said that. I remember actually a situation I had with the previous company I work in Switzerland, and they were doing some GDPR changes at that time. When now these C-levels are accountable, or they can go to jail if something happens to data. And I remember I was pushing because I was part of the central data team at that time. And we had a person that was a data product owner, but she was focused on data privacy and security. And the other person, I was more in the governance side of things. And then we were trying to push this project, to basically make sure that everybody was compliant and so on. No one was listening until it was 2 months before the law was in place and they needed to really comply with everything. And that time, I think it was coming out like in September or October, like the ruling in of that law, and everybody was on holiday. So you cannot really talk to the right people and like who owns it, who owns that, how blah blah. No one wanted to be responsible. No one wanted to take care of it. The data protection officer started to push people only because there was a deadline. And this should be preventive, not reactive, right? And we get caught up in this reactive mood most of the time in most of the organizations, and that's a little bit sad, but also it's annoying for the people working on the data platform team trying to do their job, but they are not being listened, they are not being heard, that you need to do this from the very beginning. You're not going to fix all the privacy or security issues, or in AI, for example, the biases, everything that the EU AI Act are taking care of, just because of I don't know, right? That because of a new law, we cannot fix all that in 1 or 2 months. You need to start this slowly. And I see it in the AI context. This is going to start happening as well because more things with the EU AI Act are coming. And I feel like most of the organizations, they are just very worried about how to implement AI, but not how to do it responsibly or have the governance on top of that.
Hmm. There is a very strong reactive factor to it, definitely. And I don't. We talked about the data auditor earlier, and that has also a very reactive, after the fact element to it, auditing, right? You uncover misalignment and divergence after something has happened. But there's also something proactive there when it comes to accountability, right? And if you think of accountability as a precondition to influence the work you're doing in your organization, right, on all levels, then you create that awareness, that ownership, before the issue arises, right? And this is very much fitting very well with your example, because that's exactly what not happened, right? It was more of an, oh, now we have to do something. Now it's burning. But trying to think of that accountability and ownership not as something that, oh, I want to use accountability to blame someone after something has happened, but rather than think about it as like a personal choice of taking ownership of something. And this is where it gets really tricky, because you can't assign ownership and you can't assign accountability. It has to be taken, right? So you have to create an environment in your organization where it is okay to take ownership, where it's okay to take accountability of the problems that are in the organization and try to solve them, not playing the blame game.
Yeah, but how do you push those incentives, right? What kind of incentives would you give to the people to being able to say, I want to own this, I feel responsible, I want to do something? Because I think that's one of the trickiest part as well, the change management part of data management.
Yeah, owning up to issues and taking ownership is very tricky, but also very fundamental. I don't know. There was a book in the 90s. I don't know if you heard about that. It was called The Oz Principle.
Yeah.
So there were two authors, and they went through the characters in The Wizard of Oz and talked about them from an accountability perspective. And the problems with the character were that they were not taking accountability for their own actions. And that is very much the story about The Wizard of Oz, right? The lion gets courage. Why does he get courage? Because he's taken accountability for his actions, right? I think that's a very good picture to have in your mind about that.
What have been some kind of incentives that help in some organizations to foster this kind of ownership?
Leading by example, right? Senior management that takes ownership of issues, right? That helps you to create an environment for people to step up. Well, if my senior manager can take ownership, I can do it as well. Don't try to intimidate people to take ownership. We still see that in a lot of organizations happening, sadly. So it's definitely a cultural thing. But there's also something about automation, right? And when you can automate data governance enforcement, data governance monitoring, create a baseline of doing the right things because you have encoded it, it's also easier for people to track and see issues. So in the book, I talk about something called circuit breaker mechanisms, right? That you are starting out with an automated way of handling your data governance monitoring, your data governance enforcement, but with certain thresholds and trigger points where you involve a human and bring a human in to control, to assess, to assure, or to rectify.
No, I agree with that because I remember, I mean, it was a little bit forced, but not that much, I will say. Back in 2022, 2021, with the first data mesh implementation that I did, we had a team that didn't, I mean, we were migrating first from on-prem to the cloud. And then we were putting together, all the governance and so on. And we wanted to put some business use cases, and we need a human, not only the regular QA, with the technicalities and so on, but we also need, okay, what are the thresholds for this data? What are the deviations? What do you think could be from business perspective, something that will fail and will break your data? And at the beginning, it was like, I don't understand. Why are you asking this? This doesn't make any sense, and blah, 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 blah. And they were usually very vocal about how bad the data were, right? So we needed to know from them what we can do better. That ended up a little bit with an escalation with some team hired with their boss, right? And this person kind of forced them to come with us to the meetings and talk and give us information and so on. And we put these tests, and then we started to get the metrics in a way that they never saw before. Everything was making sense, and they were harmonized. Things were like basically moving better for them. That then they decided they wanted to be part of the other meetings where when they were migrating other metrics, we would like to give these quality assurance test cases to you. We want to be part of the conversations. We want to do that. And there was a twin department for another business unit. And I was doing the conference at that time in Switzerland. And he came to me and he was like, I want what they have. What do you do? Because they are so happy and they tell me they don't have problems with the data and this and this and that. And they are part of another data director, right? So I was trying also to absorb them in the governance part. And I'm like, talk to your data director. We can have a talk and I will be able to help you to do the same thing, right? And they were actually advocating to other monetization teams to bring the same thing that they had because they were so happy. But it took a little bit of a push from management for them to understand the benefit. They were quite resistant. You have any recipe for the audience to overcome this resistance, to influence the behavior?
I think you are pointing at something quite central, and we talked about it already, that in distributed organizations, the governance problems surface in the sharp end, right? That's where it starts. And that's what you have to connect to create and show value. And then there's something about being quite explicit about governance. And I've been running different governance programs throughout the years and tried different ways of doing it. Very much the Fight Club kind of way. Never talk about data governance, the first rule of data governance. And I realize it's wrong. I think we need to talk about governance, and I think we need to talk about that we have mechanisms in place for trust in our data. That's quite central. And if you don't talk about it, how can people ever know? Right? They only know through the policies that they receive. But if you talk about it as a whole and as saying that as an organization, we stand for something that is explicit, something that wants to create value for the entire organization, and we want to coordinate it across, I think that helps. That creates that certain level of alignment that you need to be autonomous in your different parts of the organization. And then there's something interesting, and we talked a bit about automation and computational governance. Data, it doesn't behave the same way as code does. And yes, we can do a lot of governance as code, and bring it to the left, make it implicit in how we work, part of our processes. But ever since we talked about microservices, ever since we talked about domain-driven design that we also talk about in data mesh, that works very well for code. It doesn't work as good for data because data crosses domains. Data doesn't care about bounded context. And I mean, this is the problems we are seeing, right? And this is why we talk about context graphs in the first place, because data doesn't behave as code. So we can't do data as code entirely. I think that's something we need to recognize.
That's true. I mean, data behaves completely different than just a regular software engineering product, right? I mean, we can apply some principles from the software engineering side because I mean, I started in software engineering many years ago, so I understand. That's why I connect a lot the product side with the data side, but maybe on the best practices. But we cannot expect that it's going to behave like a mobile app, right? The code might evolve a little bit, but not too much. And as you said, it crosses boundaries and goes everywhere. Like people will start just accessing things, creating their own stuff. And it's really difficult to put these boundaries, right?
Yeah. And there's a good analogy here when we think about documents and unstructured data in organizations. That kind of data has crossed boundaries for decades and has also created a sense of ownership. This is my PowerPoint presentation. This is my document. I put it on my OneDrive. And that has been an entirely different approach from information management perspective to how do we manage that, right? How do we get people to bring their documents into a common repository where we can create common labels, common policies for retention, for example. SharePoint I think it was a good attempt at the starting point. It turned out to become a mess, I think, for many organizations. But now with data and the use of AI, we can't control data as we have done so far, especially when we think about it from a relational perspective. So I think we have to take some of these learnings from information management and apply them to structured data as well. And especially AI generated outcomes that apparently are everywhere now in organizations. I think we know all the term work slop, right? AI, Gen AI created emails that were sent out and then replied to, and then maybe do a summary from a meeting, AI summary, and that was then altered. And it ends up being so much random data that you're not able to control or trust anymore, right?
Yeah, especially with the hallucinations or things that get mixed in between, right? Actually, something that you mentioned before this analogy, it happened a lot. Even now at my work at ThoughtWorks, they were pushing the people to put the presentations because in a share repository, so people can see the templates for the different engagements and so on. Because they have some kind of an AI, of course, that help you to find the right information in that sea of PPTs and Excels and so on. And everybody was so upset about it, right? I don't want to share my information. That's my presentation. I work on it for, I don't know, many hours. And now someone is just going to take my information and blah, blah, blah. I wish we could do that in the real world, right? In a company, like, this belongs to me. I take care of it. I can share, but to a certain extent. That will be the right mindset. I like
Yeah,
this
exactly.
analogy that you did. It's great. But let's talk about governance that basically that influence a day-to-day behavior, right? Because that's one of the problems. Like what governance is, you see governance as an alienated topic that is just there, but you talk about automation. I believe also in the automation as well. But it's easy also to fall into the trap that you can automate most of the stuff and not talk to the real users. how do you avoid these kind of problems that you see probably very often in organizations?
Yeah, I think the problem is not to create governance. The problem is actually to propagate it and get it implemented in the organization. And you see that all over the place, right? Very good qualitatively high policies are created and written and put into a management system, but then no one knows how to follow them and what they mean and how they apply to me and my work. I think we are not really good at that. What's in it for me incentive. That's one thing. There's also that distance, right, between someone, normally a centralized team, creating a policy for the entire organization, and someone has to implement it and enforce it. And we've done this in a company I worked for a couple years back. We did a survey of what people would expect from the centralized unit. And most of them said, we want more governance, which I was very surprised by. Like, I thought we were doing too much governance. I thought you wanted to have some autonomy in the way you work. And no, they wanted to have guidelines. They wanted you to do things the right way. And then we talked about all the policies that were in place, and they didn't know about. They didn't know that there was so much in place already, because it never really propagated through to them in the same way it was meant to do from the framework perspective. So I think that entire, we build a framework, we build structures, we build an operating system, and then we get governance. I think that's a broken assumption. I think we should rather think of how can we embed data governance into how we do our work in the first place. And yes, one of the things we can do there is creating that sense of ownership, right? This is my data. I want to take care of it. I want other people to understand what I'm doing, what I'm working with. Also, automation, right? What can we take off the plate for people so they don't have to think about that because it's just done. It's just part of how we do data. We can talk about data contracts, right? To very explicitly define what certain policies, how they should be enforced throughout. And I think we talked about it right at the beginning, trying to make it explicit, right? Don't bury your governance in code. Don't bury it in centralized policies that no one reads, but make them explicit and make them attached to the actual work.
Yeah, because I remember actually at some point that in this other company that I mentioned, like 2021, we had a data governance council, right? And we have like all the data directors from the different business units. And there was a person who wrote the policies, and then they were supposed to review it. But she was basically chasing them all the time to review the policies because they were like, yeah, sure, whatever you think is right. No one read that policy PDF. Never, never, never. Like maybe they kind of read it, say something, and okay, we approve, and that's it. And that happens a lot also in the people who is in the data governance council, right? Regardless, like they need to be there because they're, I don't know, the heads, the directors, and so on. But they don't feel responsible neither. And that's why I believe in this policy as code in most of the times, right? But how do you influence the leaders to be able to participate more on this, right? Because they are also not interested. I mean, they want governance, but they don't want to be part of the change.
Yeah, and from my experience, the hardest group to talk about data governance with are middle management. C-suite is okay; they get it. Even the board of directors normally get it. Well, you have to adjust your narrative, right? Board of directors a lot about compliance and security. C-suite a lot about revenue, cost control, depending on what market you're in. But for middle management, it is really hard because they have so many contradicting incentives. There are so many other things on their plate. They are drawn in various directions, and you just need to capture their focus on that topic and help them solve their problems. And maybe you can do data governance in a way that solves one of the other issues, right? Maybe an issue with alignment with email management, or maybe an issue that can help them better align with their peers by creating data products that can be read and used across domains. But you have to connect to the issues they are drawn to. So very much the hardest group, middle management.
Yeah, that's true. Even with the CFO, I always say your best friend in the board is the CFO and the COO, because if show some efficiency and some money savings in fines or these kind of things to the CFO, he's going to be like, sure, what else should I do to enable you to make things better? But middle management, yeah, they're another thing, because they have their own Game of Thrones going on, right?
Oh yes. It's a lot of politics. You talked about the CFO. Another reason there is also that a CFO normally is responsible for audit and controlling in the organization. And that's something that you can definitely connect to from a governance perspective.
Yeah, that makes sense. But what do you think about the CPO, not the project, but the protection officer, the chief protection officer, data protection officer?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. In my mind, it should be very close to governance, a part of governance. But in the reality of organization, it's rather part of legal, from what I've seen, or HR even, depending on the organization. I think there's something to align with, because they are doing governance work. And this is one of these controversial topics, but I think that we should do governance as one in the organization. So I proposed a new definition of what data governance is. I'm not going to go through that one now, but we can do that later. But I aligned it very much with how we define corporate governance in organizations. I've talked to a professor in Norway who did a research on what are the main issues at board of directors to create some incentives for digital data-driven organizations. And one of the biggest problems is knowledge, and an understanding of that the governance they are providing to an organization should have a digital data element to it. We think of data governance as a technical function still, and we even talk about it as something human in an organization, but it's very much an instance of corporate governance in many fashions. It should be aligned with IT governance. It should be aligned with risk governance. This is where the legal part comes in, and that is also where the DPO comes in. And controversial part, I think it should also be aligned with AI governance. And thinking of AI governance alone as a distinct, separate discipline, I think that's a trap.
Yeah. Going to this topic of AI, actually, I wanted to touch it because, it's part of our day-to-day now. Something that I see quite often, right? It's this. When I talk a lot also about AI governance and about responsible AI, but I feel like data governance is the foundations that you need to be able to do AI governance. And as you said, for some people, it's like completely alienated, and no, they are part of each other. Of course, the data governance is the foundation they need for the AI governance to go, but it sometimes is quite annoying that you see this separation, and shouldn't be like that. It's just an extension of something. It's like a plugin. Let's say you put the plugin now for AI governance. Anyway, I want to bring this AI like from the management lens, for the data management lens, right? So AI doesn't create data management problems. It's basically expose them, right? Because this already what I said, your foundation is so bad that now that you have to do AI, everything comes out, right? Like the problems that you usually have. From your experience, how does AI amplify these existing weaknesses in the data governance and data management side of things?
Yeah, where do you want to start? That's a good one. Well, we can start with accountability because we already talked about that. I think AI reveals whether the accountability you have in place in your organization is just a ceremonial one or if it is actually explicit and taken. That's the first thing. And you see that quite quickly. There are plenty of examples where the accountability is, well, it has been broken for a long time. Just AI revealed that it is broken or just a ceremonial thing. One example, just a year ago, Norway had its first AI scandal where a municipality up north in Tromsø, I don't know if you heard about the town. Yeah, it's called the
I've been there.
Paris. Oh, yeah, the Paris of the North. They wrote a 120-page report on schools and kindergartens in the municipality, and the report suggested to close down 8 schools. So thousands of pupils and parents were affected. Right. What they realized afterwards is that one of these or 2 workers in the municipality have used ChatGPT extensively, right, to write the report. A professor came forth and said, I've been misinterpreted and misquoted a lot of times, but I've never been quoted for anything I haven't written. So what they realized is that I think out of 18 cited sources, 11 were made up. And when they looked into it, well, first of all, what is really interesting is that you could use ChatGPT logs as chain of evidence. That's an interesting one. But also, when they looked into it, ChatGPT asked, do you want me to verify the sources? And someone said, yeah, it's fine. So there are certain things that mechanisms, procedures that are broken already, right? Just very much revealed through AI.
Yeah. And we see this quite often. I see it a lot with heads of data or directors, for example, that they comment and they ask, I want this or I want that, just because they ask ChatGPT what are their latest trends or what to do.
Hmm.
And when you talk to them, because they come to us for advice, right? I'm like, okay, this is not possible with the state of your data management, governance, platform, whatever it is, right? It is like they put, okay, this is what I have. This is my beautiful house. What can I do with it? And then usually they come with agents. You know how it is, how agents.
Huh.
And I'm like, you cannot do agents with what you have. And they then get like a kid, in this sad face. No, but I want it because I want to have this power but agentic in my website.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, you need to do a lot of work in the foundations. You cannot just go like this because would you like to have a 7% fine on your company, based on the EU AI Act fines, right? Or are you looking for that? Because when you do this irresponsibly, when you don't take this into consideration, you are heading into some kind of a black hole. And if an auditor comes, you're the one that is going to suffer, right? You're going to be fired at the end because the C-level is like, why shall we, pay for this if you didn't take into consideration all the foundations? They're
Yeah,
always going to find
exactly.
someone to blame.
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen this as well. Also with BI. So it's not just an AI problem, but I think AI amplifies the problem that certain parts of the organization come with like 3 sticks and 2 stones in their hand and want to build a castle, and it just doesn't work, right? So that to create that realistic picture of what is actually possible with what we have, I think that's where data professionals come in.
Yeah. Yeah. Before we wrap up, I have 2 final questions for you. First, what's one thing that leaders should stop doing if they genuinely want data governance and data management to work at the scale?
To work at a scale, I think they should stop treating data governance as a framework alone, and that you just roll out and then it's there. But instead, think of it as a responsibility that is embedded in the way we work. It's a natural part of how we work. And that is a bit of a mindset shift that has to happen on various levels. But that's very much the way forward.
Thank you. And the second one, what is one belief about data maturity or AI readiness that sounds reassuring, but is actually holding organizations back?
That we are already mature. Yeah, I think a lot of companies think that they already are mature. And even if you do a maturity assessment by whatever company you choose, and they show certain issues and areas of improvement, we still think that we are mature, or we think that we just have to make do with what we have, because there's a timeline on how quickly you have to implement, publish your AI readiness to stay competitive in your field. I think that's a problem, and a quite harmful belief.
Yeah, I do a lot of AI readiness assessment, of course. And when I show the results, because I'm going to be honest, I'm not the kind of consultant that is going to come and tell you, you're doing a great job. Let's hire more people from our consultancy firm and just start building something on top. I'm more like, hey, you really need to work on this and this and that. And when they see their scores, they are like super low usually. And they are super surprised. They are in disbelief that this is possible because they think they've been investing on this some way, somehow, right?
Mhm.
Magically.
Yeah, and there's something there. There are certain assumptions that we make about how good of control we have over our data assets, how stable our environments are, and how close we are to the data. And all of these are breaking or already broken, right? Stability is broken because data is apparently abandoned through AI. Control is broken. And the proximity to data, especially when we use automated solutions and AI agents, that distance between what we are setting as rules and control mechanisms to what can actually be implemented is getting larger and larger.
Yeah. All right, Winfried, thank you so much. This conversation make it very, very clear. Please, people, do more data management, more data governance, and do it right. Not only write a paper that says that you have it. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
This is a closing thought. Data products again, or data management. Data products, sorry, don't replace data management. They make it strong and they improve weaknesses that are impossible to hide in the long run. And AI doesn't forgive ambiguity, it amplifies it. So you've been listening to Data Reality Check, where data meets the real world. Thanks for joining us, and we'll catch up next time with more real talk from the front lines of data and AI. Stay data driven. Bye.